At first glance, Five Nights at Freddy's 4 almost seems more like a spin-off or an edgy reboot than a sequel. You're not an underpaid night shift worker trying to keep animatronics out of your office. You're presumably a small child in their bedroom fighting off horrifying, monstrous depictions of these characters. The game calls them nightmare versions of the animatronics, which sums them up pretty well. And if you thought you were under-equipped in the third game, that was nothing compared to 4. All you have between you and these demons is one flashlight. And I guess the ability to hold a door closed with the strength of a little kid. This is the first of these games without cameras, so you can only rely on visual and audio cues. From a gameplay standpoint, this almost feels like a remake of the first game. You're in a room being attacked by Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. As is tradition, Bonnie and Chica have the same mechanic. They come in through the 2 doors, and if they get in your room, you die. You don't have lights this time around, so checking is a bit of a process. You have to go to one of the doors and listen into the darkness for the sound of breathing. If you hear it, close the door and hold it shut until you hear retreating footsteps. If not, shine your flashlight. You'll either see an empty hallway or an animatronic further back retreating after being noticed. Your flashlight is enough to scare them off from a distance, but never shine it when an animatronic is right in front of you because you will be immediately killed by this action. This was the hardest mechanic for me to get used to, and keeping the streak going, most of my losses were to Bonnie and Chica. There were only 2 points of entry in the first game, but this one has 2 more besides the doors, the bed and the closet. As you play, these little freaks keep piling up on the bed, and you need to get rid of them with your flashlight. If 3 are on there for too long, they'll summon Freddy, who pops out from under the bed. It's essentially a more reasonable version of the music box mechanic from 2, and I never died to it once during my attempts. Finally, starting on nights 2 or 3, at some point you'll hear and see something enter your closet. This is Foxy, and he works similarly to how he did in the first game, except instead of peeking out from behind a curtain, he approaches the closet door and you need to push him back by shutting it. Only having the bed and the 2 hallways active is very manageable, but once Foxy gets in your closet, things become a lot harder. This is because you have 4 threats coming at you from 4 different directions, and you can only deal with them one at a time. If Five Nights at Freddy's 2 felt like constantly juggling 3 things, this game is constantly juggling 4. The strategy I went with was checking the 4 entry points in a loop, so the next one I go to is always the one that had gone the longest without being looked at. This is an effective but vicious cycle. Every mistake, every moment of time wasted felt like it stayed with me for the rest of the run because it set me back a little in that loop. There is no downtime in this game. For the entire 6-hour night, you have to constantly be on the move if you want to win. One concept that has been present in some form in all these games, but especially prevalent here, is a balance between being fast and being careful. For me, it was a back and forth between dying to Foxy because I took too long listening at the doors, and dying to Bonnie or Chica because I rushed the checks and shined the flashlight when I wasn't supposed to. This was especially hard for me because of one game mechanic that was a thorn in my side for a while. Like in 1, Bonnie and Chica make footsteps when they move, and this time you can hear the direction it's coming from. But if you go to a door while the footsteps are happening, you have to wait until they're over before you can check for the breathing. And it's not immediate, there's a pause. On multiple occasions, I would be in front of a quiet hallway, use the flashlight, and get killed. I was so confused before I figured out what was going on. Much like in 3, the gameplay in 4 has a very clear direction, and that is to be as brutal as possible. It's not the hardest game in the series, I would still give that title to 2, but it definitely is the most stressful. And that is a perfect segue into this game's horror. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 is the scariest game in the series, and it's not close. The best and worst part of it is its jump scares. The jump scare has gotten a bad rep over the years because it's not difficult to make one that might get some people, so they're overused and often seen as cheap. Some have even gone as far as saying jump scares aren't scary, just annoying. I'm pretty sure I thought that at some point, but now I know better. Bad jump scares are annoying and not scary. Good jump scares are terrifying. I got used to the jump scares in the previous games, but I could never get used to the ones in 4. I didn't just flinch, I physically recoiled in my seat every time it happened. Normally when I die playing these games, I'm ready to hop right back on and try again, but with 4 I would usually take a little break to recover. It got to the point where I would get so afraid of messing up and having the soul scared out of me, I got nervous and made more mistakes than I would have otherwise. Probably not helping matters is the fact that the buttons for closing a door and using the flashlight are Control and Shift, which are right next to each other. It's easier than you'd think to press the wrong button by accident and die instantly. Aside from the most effective jump scares in the series, Five Nights at Freddy's 4 combines some of the best horror elements of previous games. It was able to combine the continuous pressure of 2 with the slow creeping dread of 1. While I was playing, I was constantly panicking, frantically trying to keep the 4 threats at bay, but if you do it right, the game is very quiet, very atmospheric. I like this setting a lot. The lack of cameras means you see very little of the world outside this room. And while you do hear a few ambient noises like a grandfather clock or crickets, you never hear any other people. This kid's parents could be 2 rooms over, or we could be playing as the last person on Earth and we wouldn't know. This house looks like every other suburban home you've ever seen, but the solitude and context makes it feel cold and empty. There's something liminal about this game. It felt like I was watching something I wasn't supposed to be seeing. Almost everybody had fears of monsters when they were kids. These evil creatures in the hallways, under the bed, or in the closet, ready to eat you the moment you let your guard down. And this game is the embodiment of that childhood fear. There's a tonal shift here compared to the other games. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 feels gloomy and oppressive. The charming character designs and dark humor, things that made this series have such a wide appeal in the first place, are absent. This is Five Nights at Freddy's all grown up, and these characters are done playing games. Actually, that's not true. One character is more than willing to play games with you. After every successful night, you get to play a minigame called Fun with Plush Trap. Basically a game of chicken where you have to shine your flashlight at this thing just before it's about to kill you. If you win, you get 2 hours taken away from your next night. I had about a 50% success rate here, but I was never able to put the reward to use. A much more notable addition is the 5th night, which is a lot like a final boss. All the animatronics you've been dealing with are replaced with one, the biggest and baddest of them all, Nightmare Fredbear. The name Fredbear has been used in the series before. It was mentioned that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza used to be called Fredbear's Family Diner. But this is the first depiction of Fredbear the character in the series, and it's really something. It's hard to tell, but he's probably 8 to 10 feet tall. In general design, he's similar to Freddy Fazbear and Golden Freddy, but definitely different in build and outfit. Fredbear uses the same mechanics as all the other animatronics. He can come in from the doors, the bed, or the closet. When he spawns inside the room, you get rid of him the same way you would Freddy or Foxy, but the strategy is completely different at the doors. You're not supposed to check for breathing, and instead always shine your light. If you see him, immediately close the door. I didn't know this and died less than a minute into my first Night 5 attempt. The main audio cue for this night is the sound of Fredbear laughing, which can be used to determine if he's at the bed or closet or the doors. Nightmare Fredbear is way too fast. He basically teleports around the house and you need to scramble to keep him at bay. This was a well-executed final boss, but as fast as Fredbear is, he can only be at one place at a time, so Night 5 was definitely less difficult than Night 4 when you were fighting 4 threats at once. This is normally the part where I discuss story, but with Five Nights at Freddy's 4, there really isn't much to say. Even for a series as heavy on lore, light on plot as this one is, 4 doesn't really have a story. We have no idea where we are, what's going on, or who we're playing as. It's not even clear if this game is a nightmare or something that's really happening. There are these Atari-style minigame cutscenes, and they do add to the hopeless atmosphere, but there is no direct connection made between that story and what we're doing in the gameplay. Most of it is lore that serves as theory fodder, so I'm going to be talking about this game a lot more in the lore part of this retrospective. Anyway, to sum up, Five Nights at Freddy's 4 is a very effective horror game that I have no desire to ever play again. I can respect the craft, I can acknowledge all the things about it that work, but at times it's pretty brutal. It's good, but not particularly fun. Despite everything the fourth game does get right, one could still look at it as a new coat of paint on the old formula. That cannot be said about the next game. It's not even called Five Nights at Freddy's 5, it's called Five Nights at Freddy's Sister Location. This game completely changed what Five Nights at Freddy's means as a series by doing away with the normal gameplay loop. You're still trying to survive 5 shifts at a dangerous job, but you're not limited to the tower defense setup. Instead, each night is a unique set of mini-games, all at least trying to be reminiscent of classic Five Nights at Freddy's gameplay. It's also a brand new location, a related business still under the Fazbear Entertainment umbrella. This sister location is called Circus Baby's Pizza World, and has its own cast of characters, some new and some familiar. It has the eponymous Circus Baby, a ballerina named Ballora, as well as Funtime Freddy and Funtime Foxy, who are these pastel, circus-themed versions of those two characters. Sister Location brought a lot of change, but there is nothing wrong with change as long as it's done well. So was Sister Location done well? I have mixed feelings about that. Sister Location was my least favorite of all these games, and that mostly boils down to the gameplay. The concept of a Five Nights at Freddy-esque minigame is not new to this series. They had fun with Plush Trap in 4, which was exactly that. But the gameplay in Sister Location was a little disappointing. Instead of going over each minigame, I'll just give a general overview. Every single minigame in Sister Location falls into one of 3 categories. The first really shouldn't count as gameplay at all because you can't lose. Press a button when the game tells you. Walk from point A to point B. Find this tiny button on this animatronic that's really hard to see. These are things you'll either never have trouble with or only have any issues your first time playing and then never again. The second category does have a lose condition, but there's no time constraint, so you'll only die if you don't know what you're doing or get impatient. Most of the games in this category are okay, but not exactly in-depth. The final category is true fun with plush trap style minigames with a lose condition and a time constraint, of which I can only think of 2 examples. One is punching a code into a keypad. It does fit the requirements. You will instantly die if you take too long or click 1 pixel outside of the right unmarked button. I won't lie, I died here a fair number of times. Part of it might be the fact that Sister Location has a custom cursor for some reason. It's perfectly functional, it does exactly what it's supposed to do, but it's just not the cursor I'm used to using that the rest of the games just let me keep. The other, much more normal example of a real minigame that feels like Five Nights at Freddy's is Night 4, one of the most infamous parts of Sister Location. You're basically in the reverse bear trap from Saw, a machine that will kill you if a screw gets loose. You have to survive 3 minutes as the screws loosen themselves faster and faster, all while these little pests are crawling all over you. And if either one of them on the sides get to the top, you die. You can't shake them off, but every shake loosens all the screws even more. This minigame is fairly difficult, and it took me about a dozen attempts to complete. During my many tries, I discovered a horrible flaw in Sister Location's format. Like all the other games, if you die, you have to start the whole night over again. But that doesn't work as well on nights that have multiple mini-games. If you can breeze through games A and B and just need to practice game C, you're out of luck. The minigames definitely need a checkpoint system. This would normally be a non-issue on Night 4 since there's only 1 minigame. If you die and try again, you can start right back at when the gameplay begins. But if you exit the game and then try again later, you have to watch the entire cutscene before you can start playing, which on Night 4 is basically 5 minutes of Circus Baby yapping.
Don't be afraid. I'm not going to hurt you. I am only going to keep you for a little while. Try not to wiggle though. You're inside something that came from my old pizzeria. I don't think it was ever used. At least not the way it was meant to be used. It's just inside, but just buried. There's no way It varies wildly from game to game how much effect the gameplay has on the overall experience. Just in horror games, for example, you have Amnesia the Bunker, which is basically an immersive sim, and you also have Doki Doki Literature Club, which has almost no gameplay at all. Sister Location falls at about the middle of that spectrum, so gameplay does matter a fair amount. And when some of the gameplay barely exists while the rest ranges from boring to confusing to annoying to good enough at best, the whole game kind of takes a hit. Still, there are other things to enjoy in Sister Location. This is the first Five Nights at Freddy's game with full voice acting, or at least the first one I played. It was okay in general, but kind of hit or miss. I thought Circus Baby was annoying, but that's not really because of the VA, and mostly because the character just loves hearing the sound of her own voice. Most of the voice acting you hear is this AI guy that gives instructions, and that was fine. Sister Location has more of an emphasis on humor, but it's kind of a one-trick pony. Most of the jokes boil down to this AI saying that the company doesn't care about its employees in a very cheerful, professional manner. Most of the jokes were kind of mid, but this one did get a chuckle out of me.
Please be aware that there are still 2 technicians on site today. Try to avoid interfering with their work if possible. Also, feel free to ask them why they are still there and encourage them to go home.
One aspect of Sister Location I will fully get behind is its aesthetic. The game has this sci-fi look I thought was really cool. This especially comes through with the new animatronics, which have a bunch of moving parts and separating panels. Even better than the look is the soundtrack. Sister Location is the first game in the series I played with a professional composer, and Leon Riskin did a great job. He's the one who made all the music I've been using so far in these videos. No complaints in that regard. Normally I can sum up the story in a Five Nights at Freddy's game in a few seconds, but there's a bit more going on this time around. There's some more focus on the person we're actually playing as. We see him go to work and unwind after his shifts. We're never told his name, at least not directly, but the sticker indicates that it might be Mike. He gets his night job as a janitor or maintenance worker or something at Circus Baby's Pizza World, and as expected by something from Fazbear Entertainment, this place is a giant OSHA violation. They make their workers crawl through vents to get to their offices and go through dark rooms with killer robots walking around. Whatever these employees are getting paid, it's not enough. Things go somewhat normally until it becomes clear that Circus Baby herself has taken an interest in Mike. At the end of Night 3, when going through Funtime Foxy's area, she jump scares you in a scripted event. And yes, I do mean she. For some reason, the AI uses female pronouns when referring to Funtime Foxy.
Let's check on Funtime Foxy. It's important to make sure she's on her stage before entering.
This isn't even the first time Foxy has been feminized like this. Mangle, the toy version of Foxy from 2, definitely also presents as more female. Combine that with the fact that Foxy spent the entire last game in a closet, it almost seems like they're trying to tell us something. Anyway, you do survive the Night 4 minigame, but on Night 5, Circus Baby is still up to something, and whatever it is, it involves Mike. Considering she almost got him killed the day before, it seems unwise to listen to her, but at this point, there's no other choice. We listen to the directions her voice gives us running through the dark, and to nobody's surprise, it doesn't end well. Mike is now in the scooping room, a place that was mentioned the previous day, but we were never told what the scooper was for. Now we find out. The scooper is not meant for ice cream or custard or sprinkles. It is a giant machine that can scoop people. And you can see that the 4 animatronics have amalgamated into this one being the game refers to as Ennard. The scooper disembowels Mike and Ennard wears him as a skin suit so they can escape the facility. This is the actual canonical ending to this game. While a little kooky and not particularly scary, I did think that the narrative of Sister Location was okay. It's not great, especially considering there was so much more room to work with than there was in previous games, but it got the job done. The problem is that it's not good enough to overshadow the flawed gameplay. This is an issue, and would even be tempting me to give Sister Location a thumbs down if it wasn't for one thing. Going into this, I never planned on doing any of the bonus challenges or custom nights in the games, but there was one part of Sister Location I wanted to at least try. Like in the second game, after a few deaths, you can randomly play these post-death minigames, and this time it's Circus Baby giving treats to kids. You can play this minigame on the extras menu after completing the story mode, and if you do a neon white style optimized speedrun of the game, you unlock an alternate route for Night 5. Now instead of listening to Circus Baby's instructions, you can hold forward and right in the dark section, which will lead Mike to the private room, a part of the facility he was never meant to see. You're informed over the intercom that this is a fireable offense, but that is the least of your worries. Your real problem is Ennard. You know, that thing that wants to wear you like a Halloween costume? Ennard's still here. Ennard still needs you, and they're not going to let you escape that easily. You can't run away, and you can't fight back. All you can do is hold Ennard off until 6 a.m.
Why didn't you believe me?
Welcome to Ennard Night, the part of the game that goes back to classic Five Nights at Freddy's gameplay and my favorite part of Sister Location. When it comes to mechanics, this is like a remake of the first game, bringing back the power mechanic, and it is just as unforgiving here as it was back then. Even more so probably, because while Freddy had this little song he played that could potentially be stalled out, Ennard kills you within seconds if you run out of power. You think you can track Ennard on the cameras? No, that's how you run out of power at like 4 a.m. Instead, you need to use the sound cues to track the animatronic. The sounds are directional, so you can tell if Ennard is closest to one of the two doors or the vent. The cameras are better used like the hall lights from the first game, just to check and see if they're right up against one of the points of entry. One nice touch is that Ennard gets more aggressive the later in the night it is. They move using the same RNG system the rest of the games use, and the AI value is always at 10 out of 20. But the time interval between rolls gets dramatically shorter. By the end, it's like Nightmare Fredbear. Ennard is just flying around the building and it's hard to keep up. It gets to the point where if you see Ennard right next to a door on the cameras, you might not even have enough time to lower the cameras and close the door before you lose. I lost a run that way. Ennard was just that fast. I have been critical of Sister Location's gameplay, but Ennard Night has some of the best game design in the series. The night is pretty long, each in-game hour taking 90 seconds, so 9 minutes total. Over that time, the RNG tends to level out, with long periods of inactivity balancing out those times Ennard would just stand there in front of a closed door. This is a challenge designed to be tough but fair, at least for the most part. There is one thing that I don't know if I would call unfair or cheesy, but I would call sadistic. When Ennard moves, there is a 1 in 25 chance, a 4% probability that the movement is silent. That's diabolical. It's not likely enough to be a constant problem, but it's just enough to lose you a run if the stars align, which did happen to me one time. It made me paranoid and tempted me to constantly look at the cameras, but I still needed to conserve power. I ended up using the backing song as kind of a timer to keep my camera checks reasonably paced. I love the song, by the way. It's called Watch Your Six, and it suits Ennard Night perfectly. My only real issue with Ennard Night is the fact that if you die, you need to go back to the beginning of Night 5 and go through a few steps, including that keypad thing, if you want to try again. That's why I came into Ennard Night very prepared. I looked up strategies, I watched successful runs, I understood the assignment. It still took me around 10 attempts, and finally winning Ennard Night was the best rush of dopamine I ever got from this series. I think Sister Location is worth playing just for this one part, and it did a lot of heavy lifting in terms of my opinion about this game as a whole. Yeah, I have my fair share of problems with it, but when you look at the good parts, the music, the art, and some of the minigames, Ennard Night especially, Sister Location was a decent game overall. At this point, the Five Nights at Freddy's games had been coming out fast. All 5 of the games I reviewed so far were released in about 18 months. But after Sister Location, there was a gap about as long with no new games. In the summer of 2017, there was talks about the 6th game getting cancelled. During the holidays of that year, Scott Cawthon released a cute little game for free as a gift to the fan base, called Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. Most fans weren't expecting much when they tried it out, but it didn't take long for them to realize they had been tricked.
Begin tape.
This little bit of freeware was in fact a Trojan horse for the final game in the series, the one that would bring this part of the franchise to a close. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to Pizzeria Simulator, so let's start with the gameplay. The main goal of this game is to stay in business and not die for 6 days, Monday morning to Saturday night. Your daily tasks include expanding the pizzeria, keeping up maintenance, and salvaging animatronics. Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator has 3 gameplay sections: what you do before opening, what you do during business hours, and what you do after closing up for the day. The first part is in line with what fans were expecting, a sort of tycoon game where you spend money and try to make the best pizzeria you can. This part is cute. You got this little helper character that's really excited about everything. At first, it seems like you can only get money from customers, but any game you install can also be played to get more money, and you get 10 game tokens every morning. These minigames range from simple to complex, familiar to confusing, and some of them drop great lore that will be discussed in detail later. You can also accept sponsorships, which at first just seems like free money. Your general goal is to just have a bunch of fun stuff, but some of your purchases have risk attached to them, and getting a lawsuit will lead to your bankruptcy pretty quickly. The second section seems trivial at first. You're in a dark, cramped little office, restocking and doing maintenance work with nothing dangerous happening. But this is like Five Nights at Freddy's 3, where your first day is just to get you familiar with the setting. We're going to put a pin in this and get back to it later because it will soon be a bulk of the gameplay in Pizzeria Simulator. In the meantime, we can talk about what you're up to after closing. For some reason, animatronics just end up laying around the premises, and according to your boss, salvaging these animatronics for scrap is part of the job. You never see your boss, by the way. You only hear him on a tape recorder. You can technically refuse to attempt the salvages, but that locks you out of the good ending. If you try the salvage, succeed or fail, you're on track. The process is just playing some audio cues for the animatronic, using a taser to zap them if it seems like they're about to attack. This is done using very subtle visual and audio clues. You only get a limited number of electrocutions until the salvage loses value, but if the animatronic attacks, you get nothing. This is a well-made and atmospheric part of the game, but I do have one issue. Some of the details about this gameplay are not communicated, and normally you would learn these things organically through repeated attempts. But if you lose here, the game doesn't let you try again. I went into this thinking that the animatronics would only attack when the paper was up, and I was able to make it through the first 3 salvages maintaining that assumption. Then, on the last one, the one with the most money on the line, the animatronic attacked during the final sound test and scared the hell out of me. That may have been an even worse jump scare than Phantom Foxy from 3. I'm sure that this part would be easier if I ever do come back to this game, but I just don't think it's intuitive enough to be as strict as it is. Thankfully, you only lose out on money here if you fail, so it doesn't kill your run. If you try to salvage at all, the animatronic will now be in your building, and that becomes a problem for you during your next day shift. Going back to that, now those loud, lengthy tasks you do in this office serve as sound lures for the animatronics you salvage knocking around in the vents, at which point this part starts feeling more like Five Nights at Freddy's. Not only do the tasks make noise, so does the computer itself and the fan that cools everything so you don't just cook in this room. The goal is to make as little noise as possible so you don't get killed, and this gets exponentially more difficult with each new animatronic. If you hear noises in the vents, you can turn to look, which will deter the animatronic there, but there are 2 vents and you will absolutely get pincer attacked. And hopefully you never accepted any sponsorships because those loud pop-up ads make things way harder for you. Thankfully, if you die here, you're able to try again. Unlike with all the other games, there's not really any consensus online about what the optimal strategy for this office part is. Your 3 tools are audio lures, a motion detector, and a fan that cools things slower but without making noise. The strategy I ended up going with was probably the slowest but least risky one, leaving the quiet fan on all night and just really taking my time to make sure animatronics aren't close before I do anything. This part is kind of nerve-wracking. Unlike all the other Office gameplay sections where you progress with time, here it's task-based, so how long it takes is proportional to how risky you want to play it. It's sort of like some of the minigames in Sister Location, except a lot more volatile. The more time you take, the less risky it is, but any time here at all comes with an inherent element of risk. I'm pretty sure I was too cautious during my first playthrough. Yes, I made it, but by the end of it, the office sections were probably 15 to 20 minutes long, and I was stressing for most of it. This cycle of improving your pizzeria, trying not to die during the day shift, and salvaging another animatronic out for your blood is, in my opinion, the best gameplay loop in the series. It's rich in content, the different parts synergize with each other in interesting ways, and it just presents a good challenge. I may have some issues with the execution here and there, but this is a rock-solid base to build a game off of, and build off it they certainly did. I really like how much obvious time and care was put into how this game looks. The The morning section is charming and cute, and there are some really catchy songs here. The other two parts have great atmosphere. There's something very eerie about this nighttime part. The dramatic lighting and ambient noises really add to the overall effect, as well as the tension you experience at only being allowed one shot. The day shift section grew on me during my playthrough as well. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 used isolation to add to the vibes, and this game does the same thing from the opposite angle. You can faintly hear all your customers presumably having fun while you're fighting for your life all day. You're in this cramped, sweaty room trying to be as quiet as possible, while these 4 animatronics are just out of sight. You're not physically isolated, but you might as well be on a different planet. No one is around to keep you company, besides the animatronics trying to kill you. While on that subject, the character design for the animatronics is the only artistic part I would criticize. There are 4 animatronics you're dealing with here. Something that looks like a mix of Funtime Freddy and Ennard, Circus Baby going through her industrial punk phase, a mysterious animatronic named Lefty, and a more broken down, much dumber looking version of Springtrap. Your first salvage is referred to in the credits as Molten Freddy, and that's a pretty apt description. This is a cool design. Much like Ennard, he looks like he's just falling apart, and the way he talks is crazy in a campy, silly kind of way. If you remember, Ennard was an amalgamation of all 4 sister location animatronics, so Circus Baby being separate must mean at some point the others got sick of her and kicked her out, which I think is understandable. This version of her is called Scrap Baby, and I think this just kind of looks stupid. I don't think Cabbage Patch Kid Harley Quinn was the right way to go here. I thought Lefty had a great design. It's obviously based on Freddy Fazbear, but there's enough unique here for it to have its own identity. Lefty is the most mysterious and dangerous animatronic in the game. They were the one that got me during that last salvage. And then we have whatever the hell happened to Springtrap. I hate this character design. Why is the head shaped like a peanut M&M? Why does he look shorter and scrawnier than he was in the 3rd game? This looks like Springtrap after 5 years of heroin addiction. This is pathetic. It's a good thing he has a cool voice this time around, because otherwise this would be a strict downgrade.
Fascinating. What they have become.
The last thing to discuss would be the story, but what happens here wouldn't make much sense if you didn't know the overall lore of the series, so I'm mostly just going to talk about that in the lore breakdown. One thing I do want to mention is the overall theme of things not being as they first appear. Much like the game itself, the pizzeria you're running is really a front for something deeper, and most of the game is trying to figure out what's really going on here. And just like in 3, there is a satisfying conclusion, except now it concludes the entire series. Overall, Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator was my favorite game in the series, and a great note to end on. There were some problems here and there, but it's obvious how much passion was put into it. This game was dedicated to the loyal fanbase of the Five Nights at Freddy's series, the normal people that turned this little indie game into an internet juggernaut. After actually playing all these games myself, I can say that these games did amount to more than just a fad. I enjoyed this series, but the games are only a part of the experience. There's also the story, which had to be put together gradually from little bits of lore. Tune in next time for a comprehensive breakdown of the lore of Five Nights at Freddy's.